Welcome to the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes that I observed when reviewing the Assignment 2A submissions in my CS3895 class in the spring of 2023. So first of all, this is a nice example of a helper class with a helper method, but please make sure that you check for success versus failure here. This isn't really doing that properly. If you go back and watch some of the case study videos we talked about in class, you'll see the way to do that. Down below, let's take a look at some of the many problems people had with their Retrofit database API. So first of all, please make sure that you put the right name inside here. So that should be, of course, queries like this. And down here, something important is missing at the end of this path name. So make sure you add that. A lot of people have the wrong annotation here. Please make sure you use the right annotation. And I'll give you a hint. This is also not the right annotation. And so make sure that you use the right annotation. I have a feeling that Retrofit and used in conjunction with ChatGPT and the controller interface may give you the hints here that you need to get this stuff done correctly. Down here, please revise this code so it uses the symbolic constants defined in the constants.java file and doesn't hard-code string literals. Please get in the habit of not hard-coding string literals. That causes all kinds of problems over time as you evolve your code. This code has the path variables ordered incorrectly. The time stuff needs to come after the route name, but before the other parts of the path. And you need to have these methods return call objects, not lists. So make sure you fix that. Down here, same sort of problem. This is supposed to return call, and it returns list instead. And there's also something important missing here, so make sure you add that. And down here, the path is incorrect. The route name has to go first, followed by the stuff that comes after it, so make sure you fix that. Now we're looking at the get timing API. This is the proxy factory that's creating the appropriate get timer or timer API instance. And make sure you very carefully read the specification comment at the top of that method. You'll see you're not doing something correctly here. Down here, now we're looking at some of the bodies of the proxies themselves in database sync proxy. Whenever you start writing long stuff like this, please get in the habit of using var. And then secondly, the implementation here doesn't meet the specification above. You need to do better error checking. And once again, please take a look at the videos that we put out that walk through all that stuff, and you can see what I was talking about in terms of how to implement that. Or just look at the source code for things like the quotes case study. I think that's in WebMVC/EX4. So make sure you take a look there. This code also does not meet the specification above. You need to handle errors correctly. I don't know what is going on here with this proxy method, but it's all over the place, and I don't know what timer sync proxy is doing here. It doesn't belong here, and get timings twice, and just a lot of confusing stuff. This is inconsistent with the other parts of the code, and this code still doesn't meet the specification above. Down here, very good example of why you don't want to be using string literals. You want to be using constants, number one. And number two, you need to take a careful look at the constant that's being used here and see why it's not going to work when you're using it for the timer API. So that needs to be fixed as well. Your code simply won't pass the test with it written like this. This code is also incorrect. I'm not really sure what this is doing, but it's incorrect. And try to get in the habit of not creating a local variable just to turn around and return it on the next line. So just return the result of creating that. In fact, you should probably use a fluent API throughout this method and not define any local variables like retrofit. You should just have the whole thing be fluent. If you look at the examples I've shown in class, they give you a nice model to follow. There's no need to have a call to OK HTTP client here in the Get Database API factory. I'm not sure what that's doing there, but it's unnecessary. Make sure you actually fill out the REST template to have the appropriate URL for the gateway, so it knows where to find it. Now we're kind of switching over to issues I saw with the database repository implementation. So please use keywords in the Spring Data API instead of defining an ad hoc method, just like we did in class. I have examples in class that are very, very similar to this. You just have to watch those videos and make sure you follow along. Likewise, something else is important is missing here. You got to put another keyword in there, also covered in class. Please use the keywords in the Spring Data API instead of passing in a sort operation here. That's quite unnecessary. You want to be able to generate that automatically. And I don't think this is working the way you think it is. You need to make sure that find all, it really does that. And I don't think it returns things sorted, so make sure you fix that. And also make sure that you need to ignore case. So you need to generate methods using the Spring Data API that will ignore case. So those are all things, once again, covered in the videos in class. Please watch those videos. Please look at the examples. Don't just try to do this in an ad hoc way, because you'll have the kind of mistakes we're seeing here. Now we're turning our attention to some issues with the movie class. First of all, make sure you fill it out. Secondly, make sure you fill out all the different to-dos. Something's missing here, for example. Make sure that you use case-insensitive comparisons via compare to ignore case instead of lower casing the strings. That's just less efficient. Please make sure you use case-insensitive search here as opposed to using compare to. This code is way too complicated. Please also use case-insensitive search. This could be made much more simple. Unclear why there's the use of an integer here. I don't understand that, but that's definitely wrong. You don't want to be converting strings into integers, for goodness sake. That's going to do very, very strange things because these are titles of movies. And now let's turn our attention to equals. So a lot of people had incomplete equals implementations that don't do all the checks that you need to do for equals. So I recommend you use ChatGPT to help you out. It'll tell you what you need and then just kind of follow it as a model. And you may have to fix a few things, but at least it'll get you started. You don't need to ignore case in equals, although you do in compare to, and you don't need to compare the vectors, just the IDs. By the way, these are things that we had gone over a number of times in class, and so I noticed some people seem to not be paying attention to what we're covering in class. Either you're not listening to class, you're not coming to class, or you're not watching the videos. So henceforth, if you have mistakes that we covered in class, I'm not reviewing your code. So you need to make sure you do the work to keep up, because it just makes extra work for me to have to go back and review your code again when you could have fixed it by watching the material in the first place. Here's another problem with a method that's defined in the data repository implementation. Not quite sure why it's done this way, but it's way, way too complicated. All you need to do is just use the Spring API keywords, and you just have to use the right sequence of those, just like we talked about in class examples. None of this stuff should be here. There should, in fact, be no implementation whatsoever in these interface methods. Same problem down here. There's no need to call find all. You can simply use the Spring Data API keywords, just like the examples that we did in class. I think this is actually pretty close to being right, but you got to get rid of that implementation. And there's no reason to have the entity manager factory method in the data repository class. That doesn't help anything. Let's now take a look at some implementations of various methods we've got. So this implementation is incorrect. You want to use basically the appropriate Spring Data API keywords in the appropriate way with the appropriate named methods. So all this stuff needs to go away. This implementation is also incorrect. There's no need to do this. Just use the JPA Spring Data API keywords in the appropriate naming order. Now we're moving into issues that we see actually with the database service.java class. So first of all, don't do this. Don't have your search method with a single query turn it into a list and call the search method that takes a list of queries. That's backwards. You want to be able to use the appropriate JPA method that was generated automatically in your database repository. Now coming down here and taking a look at implementation problems with the search method, please use a parallel stream, not a stream, for this call, and please don't use a parallel stream here, but use a stream. Down here, you need to make sure that you use toList and toStream. We'll talk more about this stuff when we're back after the break, but that's the best way to get things to work at this point with what you've got. And then down here, there's just a whole bunch of issues that a lot of people were doing incorrectly. So don't use stream, support stream, just use parallel stream. You don't need to use map followed by flat map. You can instead just use flat map. Whatever you do, don't use sequential here. That turns the whole stream into a sequential stream. Don't have distinct followed by sorted, but instead have sorted followed by distinct. And down here, remove the call to this compare ID. It doesn't belong there. Shouldn't be there. If you implement the movie class compare to method properly, that method will be used in the movie object, to do this comparison. You don't need to have anything here at all. You can have just that, and it should work fine if you implement your movie class right. And of course, also make sure that you use toList instead of collectors toList, just more concise. And then all this stuff down here is kind of clever, but it's unnecessary. There's no need to use a hash set in this way. If you feel inclined to do it that way, you really need to use a tree set, not a hash set. That'll clean things up a bit. But even that is unnecessary if you do the code here correctly. And then down here, some more issues. This person was actually quite cleverly using a tree set, which is good if you want to go that way. But the problem we see here is that then they're saying some redundant things. There's no need to say stream.sequential. That's redundant. And there's no reason to sort the output because it's already sorted. That's, in fact, exactly what we get back by using a tree set. It's sorted and unique, so there's no need to sort it any further. And then down here, the final example that needs to be addressed. If you're using parallel stream, then whatever you do, don't use for each with a method reference here because for each is not thread safe. And the add all method defined on set is also not thread safe. So instead, chaos and insanity is going to ensue here most likely, and you get very, very weird results. So instead, if you're going to do this, use collect and the appropriate collector, like toCollection, with the appropriate method reference or constructor reference, like tree set : new. That will help clean things up. Okay, so that is my walkthrough of the frequently made mistakes for Assignment 2A. Assignment 2B will be out shortly. You will need to make sure you fix all of these things for Assignment 2B, especially because we're going to have much more thorough testing. So a lot of these problems will really be flagged very quickly, hopefully, because we have more thorough tests.